So who was actually the greatest scarer in the history of Monsters Incorporated?
He's a biter.
I mean, when we look at the leaderboard on Scare Floor F, we see the titans of the industry. We have James P. Sullivan, the top scarer who was responsible for generating the majority of power for the city of Monstropolis. We have Randall Boggs, a devious technician who was constantly nipping at the champion's heels.
The big hand is pointing up, and the little hand is pointing up. The kid's door will be in my station.
And we even have the legends of the past, like frightening Frank McCay, who inspired a generation of monsters to enter the industry. But simply looking at the numbers on a screen doesn't tell the full story. To truly understand who the most famous and effective scarers were, we have to look deeper. We need to analyze their scare techniques, their physical attributes, their legacy within the company, and how they adapted to the changing world of Scream Energy. Because you see, scaring wasn't just a job, it was the lifeblood of their society. And with the recent news that a real-life Monstropolis is being constructed at Disney's Hollywood Studios in 2026, complete with a suspended door coaster, it's clear that the legacy of these scarers is more relevant than ever. But which one of them truly stands above the rest? Was it the natural-born talent, the hard-working technician, or the unsung heroes of the scare floor? Well, by going through the employee files, the scare cards, and the history of Monsters University, I think I found the answer. Now before we get to the heavy hitters, the Sulleys and the Randalls, we have to establish the baseline. We have to look at the elite group of monsters who made up the backbone of Monsters Incorporated. I'm talking about the scarers of Scare Floor F. You see, Scare Floor F wasn't just any floor, it was the major leagues. To even step foot on that floor, you had to be one of the best in the business. And while the movie focuses on the rivalry at the top, the background characters on this floor are actually fascinating when you dig into their lore. Take George Sanderson, for example. We all know George as the unfortunate victim of the 2319 incident. He's the orange-furred monster with the single horn who had a white sock stuck to his back, leading to a rather aggressive decontamination by the CDA. But don't be confused by his bad luck. George was actually a phenomenal scarer. According to the scarers leaderboard visible in the film, George Sanderson was consistently ranked as the 8th best scarer on the floor. That might not sound impressive compared to number 1, but think about the sheer volume of energy required to keep Monstropolis running. Being in the top 10 of the top factory in the city means George was an elite athlete. He was good friends with Mike and Sulley, and despite his frequent run-ins with the Child Detection Agency, getting shaved and scrubbed multiple times, he kept coming back. That shows a level of resilience that, frankly, most monsters don't have. Then you have the monsters who are actually tributes to the real-world creators of this universe. We have Harry Bud Lucky, a thin, turquoise cephalopod monster. On the leaderboard, he's actually ranked in 4th place. That is incredibly high. He's named after the late Bud Lucky, who designed Woody for Toy Story. And right there on the board with him is Bob Dentures Peterson. He's that light blue dinosaur-like monster with the removable sharp teeth. In the lore, he's a solid performer, but in reality, he's named after Bob Peterson, a legendary Pixar story artist and the voice of Roz. But why do these rankings matter? Well, it shows us that the gap between the average scarer and the legends was actually quite small. The competition on Scare Floor F was fierce. These monsters were generating massive amounts of Scream energy every single day. But to break out of this pack, to become a household name, you needed something more than just competence. You needed a legacy. And that brings us to the monsters who paved the way. You see, before Sulley and Randall were battling for the top spot, there were the legends who inspired them. And the most famous of these historical scarers has to be frightening Frank McCay. If you remember the opening of Monsters University, Frank McCay is the superstar scarer who visits the elementary school class. He is a tall, light blue monster with retractable claws and 5 tentacles for legs, but his design isn't what made him famous. It was his technique. Frank was a master of the craft. He didn't just roar, he used psychology. He knew exactly how to manipulate the environment to maximize the scream. He is the one who gave Mike Wazowski his MU baseball cap.
That was real dangerous, kid. I didn't even know you were in there. Not bad, kid.
Effectively setting the entire franchise in motion. But what happened to him? By the time of the first movie, Frank is nowhere to be seen. It's likely he retired, or was laid off during the energy crisis, but his impact remains. He represents the golden age of scaring, a time when screams were plentiful, and the job was strictly about fear. He set the standard that Sully and Randall were trying to live up to. And speaking of trying to live up to a standard, we have to talk about the monster who sits firmly at the number 2 spot in our ranking. So how good of a scarer was Randall Boggs? I mean, he was the number 2 scarer at Monsters Incorporated. He was a member of Roar Omega Roar, the most elite fraternity at Monsters University, and he possessed one of the most powerful natural abilities in the monster world, camouflage.
You just disappeared.
Sorry. If I do that in scaring class, I'll be a joke.
Randall resembles a lizard with purple skin, 8 limbs, and the ability to blend perfectly with his surroundings. This made him invisible to the human eye, a terrifying prospect for any child. But don't be confused, Randall wasn't just relying on a gimmick, he was a workhorse. Throughout the film, we see the leaderboard constantly fluctuating. Randall is almost always within striking distance of Sully. In fact, there are moments where Randall does take the top spot, even if only for a few seconds. He was driven, competitive, and technically brilliant, but what held him back? Why is he number 2 and not number 1? I think it comes down to his motivation. You see, Randall's scaring style was clinical. It was precise, but it lacked the, let's call it, charisma that Sully had. Randall was driven by envy. He wanted to humiliate Sully and revolutionize the industry, not for the good of Monstercade, but for his own power. This is evidenced by his creation of the Scream Extractor. Randall was smart enough to realize that the traditional method of scaring was becoming inefficient. Children were getting harder to scare, so he built a machine to forcibly extract screams. Now obviously this was illegal and immoral, kidnapping children and violating CDA regulations. But from a purely fame and ability standpoint, it shows that Randall was thinking bigger than just roaring. He was trying to industrialize fear. If he had used that intellect for good, if he had focused on his craft rather than his jealousy, he might have gone down as the greatest innovator in Monsters Inc.'s history. But instead, his legacy is one of villainy. He is the cautionary tale of what happens when ambition turns into obsession, which leads us, inevitably, to the undisputed champion. So was Sully actually the greatest scarer of all time? I think the answer is a resounding yes, but it's not just because he was big and scary. Let's look at the stats. James P. Sully. Sullivan is a 760-pound powerhouse. He has the size, the fangs, and the roar, which, by the way, is a mixture of lion, tiger, and bear recordings in the real world, to be terrifying. But his success wasn't just physical, it was hereditary and earned. The upcoming Monstropolis land at Disney World, the definition of a scarer, has fundamentally changed. The jokesters are the new hero. Characters like Mike Wazowski, who was always the sidekick in the scaring world, are now the MVPs of the laugh floor. But history will always remember the scarers. It will remember the leaderboard on floor F. It will remember the workhorses like George Sanderson and Bud Lucky who kept the lights on. It will remember the technical brilliance of Randall Boggs and the tragedy of his wasted potential. And it will remember James P. Sullivan, the monster who was so good at his job that he realized he needed to change it entirely. So did Sully deserve the title of top scarer? Yes, he absolutely did. He had the stats, he had the lineage, and he had the courage to destroy his own record for the greater good. He proved that being a monster isn't about how sharp your teeth are, but about how big your heart is.
What are you talking about? Put that thing back where it came from, or so help me. So help me, and cut.